Now we're going to move to more local Illinois and Chicago politics with a stellar panel of people that you know, that you've seen before in our bylines and on this show. John Seidel, who's the Sun-Times federal courts reporter, is with us. Dan Mihalopoulos, a former Chicago Sun-Times reporter who now covers government and politics for WBEZ, Chicago Public Radio, and Rachel Hinton, who's been quite a regular with us. Welcome back, Rachel. She's now the enterprise reporter at the Better Government Association, but also a former Chicago Sun-Times reporter. Welcome to all of you. Lots to talk about. I want to pick up with you, John, because you cover the federal courts. You've been covering the Mike Madigan saga, the Ed Burke saga, which it's looking like it's going to continue for some time, maybe some years to come. But give us the latest update on where we are with the federal. There's been a federal indictment of both those people, and where are we now in terms of the ongoing investigations?
Sure. Well, yeah, we had some pretty significant developments. You mentioned them. A couple of weeks ago, we finally saw the long anticipated federal racketeering indictment of former Speaker of the House, Michael Madigan, as well as a longtime confidant of his, Michael McLean. They're charged in several schemes. I think there's been lots of reporting about the scandal at ComEd. You know, ComEd had been charged with bribery some years ago. We saw McLean charged in another indictment with the ComEd. But it's not just limited to ComEd. It actually, there's quite a bit about the work of former Alderman Danny Solis in the indictment. Multiple schemes involving him. And it's one of the most significant public corruption cases we've seen in Illinois in quite some time. And you're right, it's related to the Burke case. The Burke case is coming up on, well, his indictment was a little bit less than 3 years ago. We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of that. No trial date set for him yet. And pretty much everyone that I talked to about the Mike Madigan case is anticipating that will also play on for years. So we've just kind of reached a new chapter in this saga that, as you mentioned, has gone on for quite some time.
And so now there's been an indictment, Madigan's been arraigned. Are we likely to see any more shoes drop in terms of new indictments, in terms of new revelations on this case coming up in the near future?
I think that's probably a safe bet. And you're
probably
right.
Working on something right now, right?
Probably. Well, yeah. So yeah, you're right. I should note that Speaker Madigan and Mr. McLean, they were arraigned. They did plead not guilty, and both men have claimed innocence for quite some time now. But yeah, I think there have been multiple reports pointing out ways in which this case might expand. And U.S. Attorney John Lausch at his press conference announcing the indictment, I think, acknowledged that this is an ongoing investigation. So yeah, I think there is a good chance that this is not the end of it and that we will see more. And maybe even this indictment of Michael Madigan expands.
So Dan, you were nodding your head there a minute ago. You've been covering the story as well. What are you looking for? What's coming up next from your perspective?
There's certainly possibly a superseding indictment. I mean, John could speak more to the actual process in terms of the courts, but I do know that there are other companies. They mentioned in the indictment very pointedly that there were various companies that Madigan abused his power with, so to speak. And we've only seen one company, though, really in the indictment, namely ComEd. We do know that another company disclosed to the SEC that they could be charged. And so there are other ones that have been mentioned in subpoenas, for instance, that were delivered to Madigan and to other entities a while back in the summer of 2020, when ComEd made that admission that they had bribed the longtime Speaker of the House, who was not named at that time, but who we all knew who it was. So these are fluid things. These are dynamic situations, and surely they're trying to squeeze some of the other people, hoping that somebody will flip, hoping that somebody will turn government witness, will be a cooperator. People down in Madigan's ward might call that kind of person a rat, but you know, the nomenclature here locally. So I think it's very possible
I
that
thought the
there should
term
be
was
other
snitch,
situations.
Dan.
I'm
Dan, I
sorry.
thought the term was snitch, not a rat. When
Well, it's synonymous in the 13th ward and many other wards of
or a
Chicago.
flipper.
Flipper too.
And so
Flipper
people
too.
know, a
Somebody like
flipper-
Scott Faywell in the George Ryan case, when that ex-governor
a
was tried.
flipper might have started as a snitch, but then they realize they're in trouble and they become a flipper anyway. Please go on. Don't let me.
It's pretty much all the same thing. It's an issue of whether you're going to admit some kind of guilt and cooperate with the government and do what you can, or you're going to continue to fight. And for instance, Mike McLean being so close to Mike Madigan. There's so few people that were so close to Mike Madigan as Mike McLean was. I think having recorded so many of his conversations, the feds would love for him to admit his guilt, but he says he's not guilty. He says he would never cooperate. He told us in an interview before he was even indicted himself that he's been asked to cooperate. So these are fluid situations. There's a huge amount of pressure. I don't want to be, no pun intended, flippant about it, because this is these older guys here who are facing maybe losing what time they have left on this planet with their families, and their freedom could be lost. But Mike McLean, I think it's ironic that today's St. Patrick's Day. Mike McLean and Mike Madigan, two Irish politicos whose Guinness might be tasting especially bitter today.
Right. So, and I know, Rachel, we'll get you in a minute. I want to make a quick point for everyone. The other big difference between a Madigan and a Burke and a McLean and others that are in trouble is Madigan can use his political fund, of which he has millions, that he has access to for his legal defense. McLean, a mere human, would have to pay out of his own pocket his defense. And I think that makes a difference. We've all covered people who say they pled because they just couldn't afford the hundreds of thousands of dollars to even go to trial. But anyway, my question for Rachel is, we have a June 28 midterm coming. Republicans are already talking about Madigan and corruption. What race will this have the most impact on right now?
I believe we could see this have a big impact on the governor's race. Governor Pritzker was named or alluded to in the indictment. He is not charged with any wrongdoing. The U.S. attorney last week tried to make that very clear that, the Pritzker is not involved in this. He did nothing wrong. In fact, Pritzker, I believe the next day talked about talking to the feds for, I believe, an hour or more to give them information, just to basically clear his name, to make clear that he had no agenda here. But I think we're already seeing Republicans really try to tie Madigan once again to Pritzker, as well as, any candidate I'm sure that Pritzker wants to support. We could see a tie to Madigan and the Madigan enterprise during the primary election, and probably once again in November. This will probably complicate a few state house races, as well as a few state Senate races. We could maybe see this come up, I believe, in the Senate race, Tammy Duckworth, but she's fairly safe. So I don't know that we'll see that come up.
But what was interesting is Kathy Selby, who was the best known Republican running, and she just jumped in the race Monday. She brought up the Pritzker Madigan thing as an issue in her primary without really mentioning any federal issues. But to everybody, what do you assess is the ripple effect? Can it hurt Democrats? Now we know that it's out there. Rachel set it up. Can we just go around the room here, Laura and John, and if you have a reporter, you might not. Just what is the impact? Can it work?
Well,
I'll be interested to. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I'll be interested to see how well it works this time around. Last election, we saw Republicans do this very successfully with the proposed move to a graduated income tax. They unseated a sitting Illinois Supreme Court justice. They really just harangued Governor Pritzker and many of his ballot measures, many candidates. So I believe that Democrats have already in many ways had to deal with this. They've had a reckoning with Madigan being named or alluded to in ComEd's deferred prosecution agreement. So I'll be curious to see how this affects the midterms, other than, lip service to Madigan being the head of this party for so long.
It's different now because now he's indicted. if they were able to make some headway when he wasn't indicted. Anyway,
That's
Laura,
why I think we'll still see
Even-
this come up, but it'll be interesting to me to see how effective that is this time around.
Well, that'll be the key test. I mean, he's indicted, but he's no longer in office. He's no longer in power. And thanks to, in some ways, to some of his own colleagues who finally, the famous 19 legislators who finally turned on him and helped push him out of office. So he's a different animal in terms of how the Republicans can no longer say he's pulling the strings. They can say he did, but that influence is gone. But John, I wanted to come back to you on the whole issue of corruption, and the question that most voters keep asking is, why do you end up in federal court over and over again for, all of us for decades, covering these very powerful politicians who always seem to forget about the legal lines and step over the lines? Why is the message not getting through to elected officials that corruption is going to knock them off?
It's interesting that you asked this question today. I just came from the sentencing of former Alderman Ricardo Munoz, where this was really a key question. We see this from time to time. These defense attorneys for politicians saying, clearly there's no deterrent effect on public corruption, because look at how many politicians we've sent to prison just to have it happen over and over again. And that was part of the conversation during Alderman Munoz's sentencing today. It's hard. I think about that myself, why this keeps happening. Is it a really aggressive U.S. Attorney's Office? I think there's something to be said about that, but this did not start with John Lausch or Zach Farden or Pat Fitzgerald. I mean, the history of corruption in this state goes back forever, and so you have to say that it's part of the culture as well. And just again, to circle back, I'm thinking again about the defense attorney for Ricardo Munoz, Richard Kling, who I think just had kind of summed it up as, they just don't think they're going to get caught. And even if they do get caught, maybe it's the cost is worth it. The risk is worth it. I don't know. Those are some concepts that we've heard, and we just had that conversation today. So it's definitely topical.
Yes, Rick Munoz was in the city council for a long time and saw several of his colleagues go down while he was there, but clearly that wasn't enough of a warning sign for him. Did not stop him, no, from taking money from the Reform Caucus.
And what was the sentence?
13 months.
Oh, so that
And he
means,
was convicted of.
I'm sorry.
He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering. He admitted that he took about $38,000 from the Chicago Progressive Reform Caucus. His attorney argued that his corruption was in a different category than, he kept referring to somebody who would buy a Senate seat or sell a Senate seat. And I think the judge acknowledged that and said it's not quite a quid pro quo case. One more point real quick. There was a lot of discussion about comments made by Judge Gary Feinerman years ago when former Cook County Commissioner Joseph Mario Moreno was sentenced. Judge Feinerman made the comment that you've got to change the cost benefit analysis. And I believe in that sentencing, he actually gave Moreno 11 years. So he was arguing, boost the penalty, make it change the cost benefit analysis. I'm not sure that happened in Munoz's sentencing today, but that's been talked about.
Well, Rob Blagojevich got a pretty stiff sentence when he went to prison, former Governor Rob Blagojevich, and it didn't seem to change his tune. He's still out there professing his innocence.
Here we are,
Lynn?
10 years later. Yeah.
Right. So, and by the way, it's interesting because Blagojevich actually they never established that he took anything. But I want to move on to the governor's race, and Rachel and Dan have been covering it. So let's focus on this Republican primary, where it's Rachel. We've had talk of it. Could you just do the horse race stand for us? Who stands where? The petition's closed Monday. Seems like one candidate Sullivan, may have a petition challenge on it. Could you just kind of quickly tell us the starting point of the Republican primary now, and how do you establish who's ahead, who's behind, just in what you see now in your analysis?
Yeah, difficult to handicap, but basically boils down to another situation of an inter-party fight in the GOP between people who are conservative and people who are way far to the right. There's even a whole other slate now of people that believe in the lie of election fraud. But the major candidates that seem to be shaping up here, at least the ones who have the backing of the big donors, Richard Irvin, the Aurora mayor, who has the backing of the richest man in the state, Ken Griffin, who, by the way, is teaming up now at the same time with the owners of the Cubs to try to buy Chelsea. And somebody told me today, a source told to me, what does he want to buy a lousy soccer team for? This is a huge.
That's the soccer team in the UK. So
it's a huge club in London, European champions. He's got a lot of money. That's my point.
Sale, it goes to our first segment because the owner is a Russian oligarch.
Roman Abramovich, right?
Who wanted to give up. But let's back on point, please.
Well, the point being that this guy's got a lot of money and he's backing Richard Irvin, who's practically unknown on a state level, black man from Aurora, not the typical profile of your Republican voter, but apparently they think that they can do a sort of thing where they make inroads in the large African-American electorate, which is, you know, in many elections, 99% Democratic. On the other hand, you have
a Republican primary. In order for this thought to work, you would have to figure out who your Republican primary vote is.
Well, it seems that his main challenger, main opponent, I should say, because there's obviously no Republican incumbent here, the main opponent here is possibly Darren Bailey. He has the backing of the Uline family. We're from Lake Forest, but moved their business just across the state line to Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. That's the Uline company that practically anything that you get in a box comes in their product. So again, I'm not trying to deviate here and talk about soccer or boxes, but I'm saying big money is being potentially put into these races, or at least they have that option if they think that they have a chance to win that nomination and really challenge J.B. Pritzker. But to go back to the earlier question, can they use the corruption in the Democratic Party to beat up on J.B. Pritzker? Absolutely, they're going to try that, and it could work. I mean, this, as unique as Illinois is, it's not operating in a vacuum. This, after all, Lynn knows better than all of us here, is a midterm election that, you know, by many polls is trending nationally more in favor of the Republicans. But, you know, there's a lot of inflation, high gas prices, particularly, not to mention, as I think you mentioned earlier with the ambassador, the verge of and the potential of World War III starting again from Eastern Europe. So, you know, a lot of things can happen here, but that's the general gist of the race in the Republican side. Really conservative guys versus, you know, really conservative guys.
So who
I would say,
Rachel, I hold your thought because I want to go to you. Could you incorporate in it? I mean, I'm willing to say if the others aren't, because I can operate as a columnist. Darren Bailey is part of the Trump wing of the Illinois Republican Party. He's trying to get Trump's endorsement. He's allied with Mary Miller, a representative who has been endorsed by Trump. Rachel, say whatever you're going to say, and then could you address what you think might be the strength of the Trump wing of the Illinois Republican Party?
I was going to say, going off of Dan's point about the Democratic voters, that I believe Irvin and Griffin and those who back him, as well as the slate that Griffin has put together, their goal is to try to pick off those moderate Democrats who may have voted Republican once before, who may be, tired of crime, inflation, the issues of the day, and who may be willing to give someone else a chance. That person might be a Republican. Looking at, Mayor Irvin, he has said a lot of Democratic things in the past, and now is trying to reshape his messaging, his past messaging, to try to appeal to conservatives while also seemingly not trying to completely castigate the people who voted him into office in Aurora. I think with the Trump wing of things, there are a few other people who weren't talked about. We have Darren Bailey, who is the most, I would say, far right of that group. We also have Gary Rabine. And then we have Paul Schimpf, who was a former state senator. I would say, and in that order, most Republican or most Trumpy, second most Trumpy, and then third most Trumpy. I believe with Darren Bailey, the Trump wing of things, the Trump Republicans are still vocal, they're still active. I believe that Donald Trump still has a very large base and a lot of supporters. And so getting his endorsement, getting the nod of someone who was close to Trump could be key for Darren Bailey to secure Republican voters, especially those who may have voted for Trump, who may be worried about the direction that the state is going in, and who may want change, but may not be interested in the sort of change, quote unquote, that Mayor Irvin is talking about or trying to push.
So Rachel, another piece of this is the sort of, you sort of talked about the various grades of rightness in the Republican Party in Illinois. There's also a geography there in terms of where the voters are located, and looking at Richard Irvin, for example, what's his political geography, and what is going to happen when his record really starts to become more clear to the public, because there are plenty of people who don't want to see him, his opponents don't want to see him win the primary. And so what kinds of things are they going to be putting out there, and how effective will that be, the opposition research, so to speak?
Well, we've already seen some reports on his time as a defense attorney representing people who have, been accused of kidnapping people, who've been accused of domestic violence, and other sorts of things. So we've seen that. We've seen his opponents attack him for being a Cook County adjacent Democrat, someone who only really cares about the northern part of the state. Darren Bailey, notably, is from the southern part of the state. He's from Xenia. So I think we're really going to continue to see that division. We're going to continue to see people try to paint Irvin as someone who only cares about, northern Illinois, Chicago, and the collar counties, who doesn't understand what's going on throughout the rest of the state, who's completely out of touch from what regular everyday Republicans really want. And I think that in some ways that kind of serves Darren Bailey the most, because he's a farmer from downstate, although we don't have enough time to get into the nuances of all that. But he's from downstate Illinois, he's born and raised there. He really, tries to rep these Republican values. And so I think as, this campaign cycle goes on, we're going to continue to see the Republicans in the field, the other Republicans in the field, try to paint Irvin as just not the right choice for the state, not someone who really understands Republican values, who can take the state in the direction that Republicans want to see it go in.
When you say Republican values, this is a distinction that I think is important to point out. We're not talking about conservative fiscal policies or where you stand on the issue of abortion, or if Pritzker spends too much or too little. I think we're talking about, are you a conspiracy? Do you embrace conspiracies? Do you think that you continue to want to litigate the 2020 election? That's what candidates out there who are running as Republicans are. So I want to put out there, and I wonder what you all think. I think we have to label things and talk about things very differently in this 2022 midterm, because there is a difference and distinctions that need to be made, because you have people running who want to embrace the full Trump. Conspiracy theories, election denial, etc. Can we take a spin around the panel? I'm curious what everyone thinks and what you think of my analysis here, if we have to talk about this in a different way.
One more thing, and then I'll shut up for a little while. I think that this isn't the Republican Party of the 80s. There is no Reagan. There is no It's Morning in America commercial. We're seeing the people who are now in this party, they want people to vote for them. And so that means embracing some of the things that those voters want. And for reasons that I don't think have time to get into, people are vocally, yelling about these conspiracy theories, yelling that the election was stolen. And so I think that, the Republicans and vying for that vote may feel like they're doing a disservice to not touch on that, and also may actually believe it. I hope that there will be, we can all agree on the facts at some point. But I don't think that right now the Republican Party is one that is going to tell people, no, you're wrong, the election was not wholly stolen. I don't think that we're going to see that writ large. I don't think we even got that in Congress. I think they ended up saying that, this is a very, January 6th was a reasonable political expression. So if we can't,
it was
some people. I'm not saying everybody in the Republican Party is like that, but I am saying that there is a small vocal minority that is really changing the way that the party looks, and they need to pay attention to that part.
And don't forget about the whole issue, and then let's go to John and Dan. the whole issue of COVID and how the governor and how governors are handling COVID, and the whole issue of rights and freedom. And that's something that Darren Bailey really built his claim to fame on. And I think that's another sort of a twin issue, along with the issues that you mentioned that are going to really be in play going forward. Ron DeSantis in Florida has been brilliant at using sort of being the enemy of people who believe in COVID, and he's on his way probably to a presidential campaign because of it. John, it's your take.
Sure. Look, I mean, I have to largely defer to you guys who spend a little bit more time in the political world than the legal world, but yeah,
John, you've spent a lot of time with January 6th defendants from Illinois.
That's true. Yeah, January 6th has been part of my work too. Look, I think Rachel kind of spoke to it. I think the world has changed, and so Lynn, I think you're right. I think we do have to look at things in a different way. I think we have to call things as they are. Rachel mentioned that she doesn't, who knows if we'll agree on the facts. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that we're going to agree on the facts this year or next, but I hope that we can continue to work toward that. And just one other, I guess, random thought circling back to our original conversation, given all these things, given Trump, given January 6th, given the COVID responses, when we ask about, will Madigan affect this? I mean, who knows? There's going to be one factor in all of these things that are swirling around in our elections. So who who knows if we'll be able to get a read on that when this is all said and done. But yeah, definitely things are different now.
Dan, we'll give you as we wrap up, we'll give you the final word on what this all means.
My experience with the sort of far right in Illinois and in these campaigns, I did a profile of Darren Bailey when he was starting to come to prominence, getting himself on Fox News for, as you mentioned, Laura, his involvement in the anti-mitigation efforts, legal efforts, and political efforts in that vein. Has a farm that's about the size of Schaumburg, and it's hundreds of miles from here. It's probably as close to Memphis as it is to Chicago. So they're coming from a very different world, but he's a free market guy, but took tons of PPP money, federal pandemic aid money. I think that'll be another issue for him that brings Republicans sort of back to looking at what their values are in terms of government spending. And then also had gone down to Effingham last summer when we haven't talked about Congresswoman Mary Miller, the first term Congresswoman who cited Hitler shortly before she was sworn into her first term, and shortly before, I think, January 6th, if I remember correctly, went to an event that was headlined for Mary Miller by Marjorie Taylor Greene in her first visit to Illinois. That was in Effingham last summer.
Yeah.
A lot of rhetoric that was very, very vitriolic toward Chicago. I mean, I remember one of the lines was, if people come and try to riot here, which is like, where, at your cattle farm? But if people try to riot here, we have guns and we'll shoot back. So how do you really build this campaign to be elected the governor of the entire state? If you're someone, and Darren Bailey, by the way, wasn't at that MTG Mary Miller thing, I should add, but how do you build a campaign when so much of your career is built on hating the Chicago area and Chicago in particular, and painting it as some sort of hellhole that is corrupting the rest of the state? Some of them are even talking about seceding from the rest of Illinois. I believe that Bailey was a co-sponsor of some of that legislation, which of course went nowhere. Having said all that, how do you appeal now to Chicago and turn around? Well, he tried to get a supporter in Logan Square. It turned out to be a January 6th defendant. So there's a lot of contradictions there.
We try to get as much in as we can, and if it were left to us, we'd go on another 2 hours, but we're going to wrap it up now.